Hey everyone, I am Steve from GamersNexus.net, and today we're looking at the GTX 980 Ti video cards in SLI. That's two of them. I found out we had a second one, so we did an SLI test, and I tested these in SLI against two GTX 980s, a Titan X, of course, and then a whole suite of other video cards. We didn't include some of the lower end cards because they're out of the price range of this. So for SLI testing, we're mostly looking at the 980 Ti's, of course, and the 980s. And the price drop of $50 brings the 980 down to $500 for a single card. It's $1,000 for SLI. In this case, they're $650 each, so that's $1,300 for SLI. And the Titan X is a single video card solution at about $1,000 flat, depending on who you buy from. And the Titan X, we already talked about, is sort of invalidated as a value buy card. And this is because the 980 Ti is $350 cheaper and gives about the same performance in most games. So the only place you're buying a Titan X at this point is if you're planning to do SLI of those, because that would give you a tremendous performance output that you don't get from some of these other solutions. So to quickly recap the specs of the GTX 980 Ti, it's got 2816 CUDA cores, the Titan X has 3072, the 980 is a little bit lower than both of those, and the base clock of the 980 Ti is 1000 megahertz, so we ran these tests at the 1000 megahertz base clock, and boost is 1075 or something like that. I've got an overclocking video already on the channel. Check out the channel if you're curious how the 980 Ti overclocks. It was pretty good. It was about 40% OC in terms of clock rate. It's about 20% gain, so that's the recap of that. We've done SLI testing a few times on the channel now, but let's just quickly recap how SLI works. SLI is NVIDIA's form of a multi-GPU solution. It uses a scalable link interface bridge, or SLI bridge, to connect two or more video cards for sharing processing power and things like that. AMD's solution is called Crossfire. On paper, they perform pretty similarly in terms of how they interact, what the bridges do. But in practice, it's really down to drivers and game implementations to dictate how SLI, Crossfire, whatever multi-GPU solutions actually perform in-game. SLI bridges the video cards so that they share pixel processing power and other processing power. They do not share video RAM, so VRAM does not stack. We don't get 12 gigabytes because we've got 6 and 6 in this case. GTA 5 is an interesting game in that it shows your VRAM consumption as a slider bar, and this is actually a pretty cool thing, but it's a little bit wrong in that it shows the stacked video RAM value. So if you've got two cards at 6 gigabytes each, it'll show 12. It's not really how it works. You don't get to use 12 gigabytes just because you've got two sets of 6 in your solution, but with DirectX 12 things are changing, and that's because of a couple of things. DX12 is introducing a lot of stuff like split frame rendering instead of alternate frame rendering, which is what we use right now, and it's also going to allow sharing the video RAM between solutions, and further it'll allow using non-same brand video cards for SLI and Crossfire configurations, and in theory you could combine AMD and NVIDIA in a single multi-GPU solution with DirectX 12. Whether this will work is sort of a question of drivers and game optimizations, but on paper it is possible. The current AFR, or alternate frame rendering version of SLI, introduces some low 1% and 0.1% frame rate outputs for gaming, so this is a question of frame times. The 99th, 99.9 percentile frames are sometimes lower in performance than a single GTX 980 or 980 Ti, for instance, and this is because of CPU overhead, DirectX API overhead, which we've done a video on, and other inefficiencies in the pipeline, a lot of which will be resolved with DX12. But DX12 isn't a magic bullet. We've got bottlenecks elsewhere, like lane availability. With Haswell, the non-E version of Haswell, there are only 16 PCIe lanes on the CPU and 8 on the PCH, Platform Controller Hub, also known as the chipset. The current 9 series chipsets by Intel, the H97 and Z97 chipsets, offer 8 lanes, so you've got a total of 24, 16 CPU, 8 chipset, and that's not enough to do by 16 by 16, x16, x16 if you want to call it that, GPU configurations for multi-GPUs. And this is something that's a bit curious. If you've seen some motherboards, like our Gigabyte Z97X board we bought for testing, will actually list x16 as a possible configuration for multi-GPUs. If you're wondering how this is possible when there aren't 32 lanes available, it's because of multiplexing. So you can have a PEX chip on the board, and this is what it looks like. It's made by PLX, and PEX multiplexing is basically taking multiple analog signals converging on one point, and it outputs a single signal and then does what's called switching. So in the device manager, you'll see PCI downstream switch ports. These are the device manager representation for what's going on when you're multiplexing your lanes. And multiplexing lanes basically means that you're optimizing the lane division between multiple ports for multiple devices. So if one device is more heavily loaded than another, the multiplexing chip will divert some of the lane availability to the more heavily loaded device and take away from another device that is less heavily loaded. And this is just an optimization technique that doesn't create more lanes, so if all devices are under full load, it's not going to help you there. But it does effectively artificially produce more lanes strictly in the fact that it optimizes where the lanes are divided between devices. Depending on which board you're using, it's questionable how much of a performance gain this gives you, and depending on which GPU you're using, because if you're loading all of your GPUs, it doesn't do anything for you. But it is a technology that we use in our test motherboard because we've found that it actually does allow for like 4-way SLI configurations on Z97 without too much of a performance hit. Let's talk about the benchmarks now for the 980 Ti's and SLI. So these benches were run in comparison to our previous 980 Ti single solution and 980 SLI solution. In our testing, SLI generally saw a rough 16 to 20% increase in performance over 2-way GTX 980 non-Ti SLI, and it's a noteworthy gain, but value is still questionable because it's at $1,300 for the Ti versions versus $1,000 for the SLI 980s. One thing that does become clear though is that a single Titan X has really pretty poor value right now with the launch of the 980 Ti and the price drop of the 980, but multiple Titan X's would offer unachievable performance elsewhere, so if you're looking at that as a solution, it's still valid. It wouldn't be great value, but you'd get the performance, and at that point you really don't care about value if you're SLI and Titan X's. It's not a thing you're concerned about. In some of these charts, you'll notice that SLI 980s and SLI 980 Ti's perform effectively identically, and this is strange on paper. It's likely due to CPU bottlenecking on our 4790K CPU or software side bottlenecking in the games, but most games, sans Metro at 1440p and Grid at 4K, show a healthy difference in performance, upwards of about 20%, as I said. You can view the full article linked in the description below on the website where we have all the charts, test methodology, things like that. We explain the 1% versus 0.1% frames, and now it's just a matter of value. So is it worth it? With 980 Ti's and SLI, you're spending $1,300 versus 980s and SLI at $1,000. The Titan X we sort of rule out at this point because it's a single GPU solution. If you're buying just one of them, it's not good value, even against a single 980 Ti, which is $350 cheaper and performs pretty close, just has half the VRAM. A 20% gain for $300 is questionable, I think, for a lot of system builders, but if it's not for you, then it's a good solution. You're gaining about 0.06% per dollar if you look at it that way. And although the value is questionable at $300 gain over 980s and SLI, that's really up to you to decide if that's worth it. One thing I will say is that for the first time in my benchmarking history, Far Cry 4 was actually producing a fluid and playable frame rate without the odd stuttering and hiccuping that we normally get at 4K testing. So that was thanks to the Ti SLI version. 980s and SLI are pretty similar, but you have to drop a few settings to get what I'm talking about. And then single GPU solutions really kind of struggle at 4K in Far Cry 4. So that is our 980 Ti SLI benchmark. You can check the link in the description below for the full article. Thanks for watching, as always. Huge shout out to Icon, Greg, and Rob for being our first 3 Patreon backers. It's a big help to have the support of the viewers and community so we can rely more on you guys and less on advertising, which is pretty important because we do post a lot of critical videos. So that is all for this content. If you like this type of stuff, check the channel for more 980 Ti information. Sorry I'm a bit nasally, I'm pretty sick right now, but that is all for this time. I will see you all next time.